When Paul invited me, he gave me a mission impossible. That is to say something smart, succinctly, in 10 minutes after two great minds. So in 10 minutes, I would try to do, hopefully, something that would add a little perspective to our discussion today. When we heard Kishore and Suchi, they clearly laid out the world we're in. And I'd like to just add another perspective, which is geoeconomic rather than geopolitical. And hopefully that will bring our discussion to a full circle on what we are really observing. So for 10 minutes, I have some quick presentation for you. Next page. Next page. If we look at today, next page and the next page, the 2 pages are, am I to control myself? Who is going to help me? Maybe you can help me, just 10 minutes. If we look at the world today from a 500-mile perspective, there are 2 very clear wars in the world. One involves Europe, another involves the Middle East. Next one. And both will have huge impact, like Kishore was saying, will have huge impact in our world and in the world order. Next page. So let's take a look. In addition to just having a tug of war point of view of how US and China are divvying power, let's take a look at a possibility that US-led world order is now at a bifurcation point. There are 2 different forces pulling the world. There are 2 polarizing forces. One is the traditional USA plus, which is geopolitical. You have something like NATO and the old TPP and so on and so forth. Another one is a new emerging force, which is PRC-led, PRC plus, which is primarily geoeconomic. One relies on geopolitical might, another relies on geoeconomic influences, such as the Belt and Road Initiative, and so on and so forth. By definition, when you talk about geopolitical influences, it has to work in a mutually beneficial way. It has to work in consensus. And this new way of looking at the world, 2 different forces polarizing the world, will have a more diverse view on how the world may evolve. So now take a look at the 2024 election. In the United States, you may take Kamala or Trump in terms of their perspectives and how they plan to use government budget. So one would primarily focus on military and security. Another would probably focus on social issues and so on and so forth. This morning we heard Kamala said what she intends to spend in terms of building back a middle class. But all of this will also have a huge impact on the already terrible deficit, which is about $35 trillion. And that particular deficit has some components. One is you have huge mandatory spending, Social Security and healthcare. Those are mandatory spending. Then after the mandatory spending, you do debt service and you have some discretionary spending. So where would you spend the discretionary spending would have a lot to do with the rest of us in terms of the world. And they would also have differential impacts on the United States domestically. Some would impact the rich, the haves, and some would impact the have-nots, the middle class to a lower middle class. So let's tie everything together. Yesterday, Peter Peterson is one of the foundations that I look at all the time. They issued a recent analysis from the Penn-Wharton budget model saying that the expected program by Kamala would increase the U.S. deficit by $1.2 trillion in the next 10 years, and the program by Trump would increase the deficit by $5.8 trillion in the next 10 years. So this is an economic perspective. This will impact how America can and would execute their geopolitical or geoeconomic programs. Next page, please. So I'm trying to lay out some more complicated things to make your life more interesting. In addition to the existing Pax Americana, which we all understand has a world order or the rule-based order primarily decided by the United States, the world is evolving into a multilateral order, and at least there are 2 major factors. One is the regional and multinational associations or alignments are getting increasingly more powerful. Starting from RCEP to BRICS, to G20, to Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and to other regional organizations in the Gulf, in Africa, in Americas. So the regional forces are coming back, and by definition, it's the beginning of a multilateral order. The other one is the emerging hub and spoke alignments, not only with the United States as the hub, but also China as the new hub, which is the geoeconomic order. So the world is now a little bit more complex. The next page. Let's make it even more complex. There are new drivers moving our world forward. Technology and manufacturing capacity is changing, especially for digital AI migration, for the EV and the entire energy transformation, and the next frontiers. Nuclear fusion, quantum computing, space, and deep space. All of these are moving in front of our eyes. Then the second new drive is the world trade and new capital market is changing. It is increasingly flattened, and with a stronger platform-based economy, especially in the digital side, you would have the value redistribution. By that I mean, when you look at China price, China standard, and China platform, you would gradually have a world in which the resource provider, the manufacturer, and the branding companies, initiatives, will gradually ease and shift the distribution of price and the distribution of value. The last one, very quickly, is you still have huge challenges, the existential challenge to human beings. Global warming, the pandemic, all showed us in that new world, the lessons learned from the COVID, is that we need to work together. We cannot be separated. We cannot imagine that we can separate the world and still resolve all these new challenges, the existential challenges to human beings. So next page. But there is a very clear inequality in distribution of wealth and inequality in distribution of value. This is the top 10 companies in the world by market cap. And I also added Tesla, though it's the 11th. In the top 10, you only have Saudi Arabia's Aramco, you have Berkshire Hathaway, and our TSMC in the top 10. So the others are all American-based companies. Next page is even clearer. This is the multiplier effect of Wall Street. I looked at their revenues, their market cap, their price per share, but the most easy telling story is the PE ratio. You look at Apple. The PE ratio is at, well, I can see mine. PE is 34. Microsoft, 35. Nvidia, 50. Alphabet, 22. Amazon, 42. Meta, 26. All of these companies enjoy huge PE in the capital market, and therefore they continue to be the richest, more wealthiest companies in the world and have the ability to continue to drive our future. Next. However, if you look at the economic, the manufacturing, the exchange of goods and services, while America believes that they can separate the world in giving you tariffs or sanctions, this chart was done by, the next one. This chart was done by economists who calculated the interdependency. The blue one has a over 40% interdependency with China. And China, of course, doesn't have interdependency with itself, so it's yellow. When the United States tried to separate the two worlds, it has to address the symbiosis relationship between US and China, which is almost impossible to break at this time. Next page. Ladies and gentlemen, we have heard two brilliant minds, and I'm trying to just add a little bit of geoeconomic forces currently at work. So my last three questions are to the brilliant minds and to the floor. With the two wars still in progress, can or how can Asia remain as a safe haven? Because Kishore kept saying we are living in the Asian century. And people sometimes branded him as pro-China. And I always think of Kishore as someone who is pro-Asia. And I think that's the best title for you. You believe that we don't have to follow the path of Europe, which now actually lost its autonomy or any hope of autonomy with the Ukrainian war. So can Asia be different? How do we get out of this bind and not be dragged into yet a third front? And would the safe haven different with the Trump perspective, which would be more militarily and security driven, or a Harris administration, even though Harris also showed extremely strong attitudes towards China must not be number one in the world. And they are unanimous in that consensus. The second question is for my own curiosity. While I promote geoeconomic forces as the new order and believe that it would eventually, quote unquote, eventually overtake the primacy of geopolitical forces. Because if you look at the world, political elites always believe that they can dictate the world while economic elites and the world they created become our way of life. So eventually, geoeconomic order may overtake the primacy of geopolitical order. However, all the signs in our recent history seem to be on the opposite side. Trade and technology are weaponized, and all the world economic order as we believed in the first decade of the 21st century, that everybody went into WTO, have now been dissipated and have been separated into different orders. So are we being too optimistic or are we simply being stupid? The third one is for everyone, especially we're talking about U.S. election today. U.S. is now the singular regional hegemon. This is Mearsheimer's thesis, right? U.S. is a regional hegemon, but there are no other regional hegemon. Or there's no opportunity for other regions to have their regional hegemon. So when U.S. is a singular regional hegemon, will this status last with the Trump or Harris administration? If yes, in what way, shape, or form? If no, when and where will we see the first crack? So with that, let me conclude. Please join me in thanking the two brilliant minds, and we have left them 3 huge questions. Thank you.